Eleanor Roosevelt's marriage was a facade because behind the smiling photographs and the image of America's most admired First Lady was a partnership built on betrayal, humiliation, and a wound that never fully closed. For decades, the world saw Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt as one of history's great political marriages. Two people who steered a nation through Depression and World War, standing side by side at every turn. Textbooks call them a partnership. Biographers call them a team. But peel back the public image, and what's left is something far colder. A woman who offered her husband a divorce, was talked out of it by his own mother, and then spent the next 27 years discovering that the promise he made her was never really kept. This isn't the story of a happy marriage that weathered a rough patch. This is the story of a betrayal that was supposed to end in 1918. And according to the people who were actually in the room, never truly did. By the time you finish this video, you'll understand why their son once described his own parents' marriage not as a romance, but as a truce. The stakes involve Eleanor's sense of self-worth and security being threatened by her husband's betrayal with a woman she had personally brought into their home. Rewind to 1913. Franklin Roosevelt has just been appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy, and the young family relocates to a rented house on N Street in Georgetown. Eleanor, then 30, is juggling 3 small children, a demanding social calendar that comes with Washington political life, and a household that runs almost entirely on her shoulders. Franklin's career is taking off. Eleanor's world is shrinking into duty. Overwhelmed, Eleanor makes what seems like a practical decision. She hires a social secretary to help her manage it all. The woman she chooses is 22-year-old Lucy Mercer, tall, elegant, and from a once prominent Maryland family that had fallen on hard times. Lucy is capable and warm, and Eleanor genuinely likes her. She's not just an employee, she becomes a fixture at Roosevelt family dinners, sometimes even standing in as the extra guest when the table needed balancing. That closeness is exactly what makes the betrayal to come so devastating. This wasn't a stranger. This was a woman Eleanor trusted enough to let into her home, her social life, and her children's world. And by 1916, while Eleanor was raising 5 children and holding the household together, her husband had begun a romantic relationship with the very woman standing beside her. The stakes here go beyond simple jealousy. If discovered, this threatened everything: Eleanor's dignity, her marriage, the stability of 5 children, and, because divorce was politically fatal in that era, Franklin's entire future in American public life. A twist occurs when a package of love letters, discovered in a suitcase, changes the narrative completely. For nearly 2 years, Eleanor either didn't know or didn't let herself know. Then, in September of 1918, Franklin returned home from a naval inspection trip to Europe, seriously ill with what was likely double pneumonia and influenza. Eleanor, ever dutiful, took on the task of unpacking his luggage to help him settle back into bed and recover. What she found inside wasn't medicine or paperwork. It was a bundle of intimate letters between her husband and Lucy Mercer. Proof in his own handwriting and Lucy's of an affair that had been going on for years, right under her roof, conducted by a woman she had once called a friend. Eleanor later described the moment in stark terms. She said the bottom genuinely dropped out of her world. Everything she thought she understood about her marriage, her household, and the person closest to her collapsed in the time it took to read a handful of letters. When Franklin had recovered enough to speak, Eleanor confronted him directly, and in a move that stunned even close family members, she reportedly offered him something almost unthinkable for a woman of her class and era: his freedom, a divorce. For a moment, the marriage that the world would later celebrate as a great American partnership came within inches of ending in scandal and separation. A second twist occurs when outside forces intervene, not to repair the marriage, but to preserve Franklin's political future. The divorce never happened, but not for romantic reasons. Franklin's formidable mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, made her position brutally clear. If her son divorced his wife, she would cut off the financial support the family depended on. At the same time, Franklin's trusted political advisor, Lewis Howe, warned him in the plainest terms that a divorced man had no future in American politics. The scandal would end his career before it truly began. So Franklin made Eleanor a promise instead. He would end things with Lucy Mercer completely and never see her again. Under pressure from both directions and weighing the future of 5 children against her own personal happiness, Eleanor agreed to stay. But staying didn't mean healing. What emerged from that crisis wasn't a repaired romance. It was something closer to a ceasefire. Their eldest son, James, later described what his parents' marriage became from that point forward as an armed truce that lasted until the day his father died. Eleanor herself, writing to a friend years afterward, put it with quiet precision. She had the memory of an elephant. She could forgive, she said, but she could never forget. Notably, when Eleanor wrote her own autobiography nearly 2 decades later and recounted the events of 1918 in detail, the long hours she spent volunteering at military canteens, Franklin's illness, even her daughter winning a puppy in a lottery, she left out the affair entirely. Not a single word about the near destruction of her marriage. The silence itself tells you how deep the wound ran. The climax reveals that Franklin never actually honored his promise, and that the deception around Lucy Mercer quietly continued for the rest of his life, hidden from the wife who had spared him public disgrace. Franklin told Eleanor the affair was over. Historians now largely agree it never fully was. Despite his vow, Franklin kept Lucy in his orbit for years. He even arranged for her to attend his 1933 presidential inauguration, the exact kind of contact he had sworn off entirely. For 2 decades, the connection persisted quietly at the margins of his life. Then, in 1944, Lucy's husband died. Rather than letting the relationship stay in the past, Franklin, by then in his final year as president, and gravely ill himself, asked his own daughter, Anna, to help him arrange secret visits with Lucy at the White House. Anna knew the full history of her father's affair and knew what it had cost her mother, but she agreed to help anyway, keeping the arrangement hidden from Eleanor. Lucy would arrive under an assumed name, sometimes bringing her own daughter or a friend along to keep the visits looking casual and innocent. The final blow came in April of 1945. Franklin was at his retreat in Warm Springs, Georgia, and Lucy had arranged, through a letter marked personal and private, to visit him there. She was in the room, sitting with him, when Franklin Roosevelt suffered the fatal stroke that would end his life. Eleanor was not there. The betrayal she thought she had confronted and resolved back in 1918 had, in truth, never really ended. It had simply gone underground, hidden from her for the rest of her married life, with her own daughter helping to keep the secret. The conclusion reflects on how a public partnership and a private betrayal can exist inside the very same marriage, and on what silence cost the woman who lived through it. What makes Eleanor Roosevelt's story so striking isn't only the betrayal itself, it's what she built in spite of it. Rather than retreating from public life after 1918, she expanded into it, deliberately and permanently. She began traveling independently, cultivating her own political relationships and her own causes, separate from her husband's career. Some historians argue that the very distance the affair created in her marriage is what freed Eleanor to become the extraordinary public figure history remembers, the First Lady who held her own press conferences, championed civil rights, and later helped draft the Universal Declaration of Human Rights at the United Nations. But that remarkable public legacy has, in a way, buried the private one. Eleanor Roosevelt spent nearly 3 decades standing beside a husband who never fully let go of the relationship that shattered her trust in her own home. She hosted his state dinners, campaigned at his side, raised his children, and helped build one of the most consequential political partnerships of the 20th century, all while carrying a betrayal that the country never knew existed and that even her own memoirs refuse to name. History remembers Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt as one of the great partnerships in American political life. In the ways that shaped the nation, perhaps it truly was. But behind closed doors, in the rooms the cameras never reached, it was also something far more complicated, far lonelier, and far crueler than the photographs ever let the world see.